Okay, go ahead.
Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Board of Education's workshop on the reopening plans. Today's format is going to begin with Dr. Rogers making a presentation for the public and for the board. And we'll receive the feedback that the district has received, as well as updates on the task force's work on our reopening plans. And after Dr. Rogers is finished, the board will have the opportunity to ask questions and give feedback of their own on the plans. Next week on the 29th, we will have a public meeting. It will be a live meeting, and there will be audience to the public. And after which the board will make some decisions on the plans that are going to be presented to the state. Dr. Rogers, after you.
Ms. Franklin, would you like to do the Pledge of Allegiance to get the meeting started?
I would love to. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty and justice
for all.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Ms. Frankel. Thank you, members of the Board of Education. We're going to take you through a PowerPoint presentation. I'll obviously linger on some of the slides. I'll get some help from the administrative team. Obviously, all of us have been heavily engaged this summer working on the twin problems of either reopening or remaining virtual. Obviously, we know we have a huge challenge ahead of us, and time is short. We're in the process of working on the guidance that we were given by the state of New York early last week. That guidance was about a month overdue. And so obviously it changed our plans in terms of how we wanted to structure the work. We're certainly not done yet. But I didn't want to let any more time go by without updating you on where we stand in progress with our efforts. And also before we start to calcify anything, I wanted to give you the opportunity to work in partnership with us to give us your reactions, your feedback. Obviously, we've gotten a lot of public feedback through the survey that we did. We're looking to get more feedback from the public in the next several days. After this presentation is posted online, we're going to give parents a chance to react to it, members of the community as well. And that will inform the decisions that we make as we go further and begin to refine things more. I will say that there are going to be a lot of unknowns still. Some of that is because the guidance is literally changing on a daily basis. We got a major piece of new guidance last night that changes how we were allowed to think about social distancing and other protective measures. It made some of the ideas that we had obsolete. And so we're going back to the drawing board with some of that because of that late breaking guidance. And I anticipate that that's not going to be the very last piece of late breaking guidance that we get. I was on a webinar with the New York State Commissioner of Education, the state's highest education official, this afternoon. And one of the things that she said during that webinar is that it is their belief that what will happen is we will make a series of assurances to the state of the kinds of things that we will assure the state our plan has, but they believe that our plans are all going to be living documents and that they're all going to be iterated and updated over time as we look at environmental conditions and we take those into account. And as we learn going into the fall from our initial efforts and what may need to be changed and improved and iterated. So that was the expectation that she said she had. There were 300 other superintendents on that meet with the commissioner. And, she also said, and I'll get into this a little bit later when we get into the presentation, we had a number of questions about things that were unclear in the guidance or things that we felt were unknowns. And she conceded that there were a lot of unknowns as well, and that the state education department had reached out to the governor's office for additional clarification on a number of points. And until those clarifications are resolved, there are large parts of the plan that cannot be built. So with that said, I will bring up the presentation, and you'll hear from several voices of the people who have worked on this, although this has been a project of the entire administrative team. And since I'm not able to see what, oops, I should go back to the start. I'm not able to see what your screen shows. I'm assuming that you have a full screen view of the opening slide. Is that correct? Can somebody just nod and I'll feel better? Yeah, thank you. So obviously we all know the background of why we're here. Sorry, trying to move my Zoom screen out of the way. The governor had announced on the 13th that they were going to give guidance to school districts. The governor also outlined a plan for how he is going to make decisions about reopening. And he also made it very clear that the decisions about reopening would be made by his office. So, and one of the questions that's come up is, whose decision will it be to reopen? And the governor made it very clear that the decision is going to be his. What he said is, if a school is in a region that is in phase 4, and Long Island right now is in phase 4 of the reopening, and if the daily infection rate stays below 5%, right now it's about 1.1% on a rolling average, then he will permit reopening. But that final decision will not be made until the first week of August. So the governor also said at that press conference that if at any point the regional infection rate goes above 9%, the phrase he used, the metaphor he used was, we are going to hit the giant stop button. So the advantage of using these metrics is that they're clear. Later in the presentation, there's a link to where they can be found online. So if people want to follow along themselves, you can see where all of this data is housed and collected. Obviously, we're watching this on a daily basis to see if there's any kind of a change, because it gives us a sense of what the governor is likely to do when we get to the first week of August. We're obviously proud of the fact that as a state and as a region, we went through a really difficult time in the spring. I'm extraordinarily grateful to our essential workers, our first responders, the healthcare staff, other essential workers who really did heroic work to help us through this public health crisis. And I'm proud of our teachers. I know that this was difficult work. I know that it was not the learning program that we have when we're in person. Very hard to replicate something as good as what we do in person online, but I really appreciate how hard everyone worked to try and make sure that students have the best continuity of instruction possible. We stood up a meal program, and we're giving out literally hundreds of meals to make sure that no student went hungry. Our partners in that were extraordinary, making deliveries to people who were unable to pick the meals up themselves. And the thing I'm proudest of are the efforts of our students. You see some pictures of some of them here, donating personal protective equipment, sending messages of love and support to essential workers, raising money for food pantries, any imaginable thing. There were just so many of them. And I've been really proud to highlight them as bright spots in my communications to the community. And I think it's actually, if there's one silver lining in all of this, probably the community has gotten a better sense of how extraordinary our students are in trying to make the world a better place, because they've gotten to see these reports with every one of our district communications. So a little sense of the timeline of what we've been working with. We've been doing reopening task force meetings. Some of those meetings prior to the guidance being released were a little bit of shooting in the dark, because we can certainly go and look for what best practices are. We can speculate as to what the state will or won't require, but until we got the state of New York Department of Health guidance last week, and then the state education department guidance about a week ago today, we really needed much more detail. The Department of Health guidance is about health protocols. It's about 45 pages long. The Education Department guidance includes that and has additional guidance about transportation and other things. It's about 145 pages long. The Ed Department has now released 2 iterations of a Q&A document following up on that. And the latest iteration of that document was yesterday, and it actually overturned some guidance that was given to us by the previous document. Again, we think that this is going to be a work in progress for them as well, and we'll stay attentive to the changes to their own guidance that they make as time went on. We've surveyed our staff to get a sense of their thoughts and concerns. Unsurprisingly, they're worried about safety. And we've surveyed our parents, and we had a wide range of opinion. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a while. Tonight, the board is going to workshop with the administration, react to the plans in progress, and get some of the survey results to react to as well. Tomorrow, we'll open a thought exchange. You'll be familiar with this tool. It's how we took community feedback on the start time discussion. And this will be a chance for the public to react to this presentation tonight and to give us feedback. On the 29th, I'll take one step forward to take a step back. Our initial plans are required to be filed with the state on the 31st. Again, what the state requires us to file with them is a list of assurances of what will be in the plans. The state is not asking us to file the plans themselves, just the assurances, but we will make the plan available online. And so I want to go through with the board on the 29th, the plan with enough time for the board to make final reactions to the plan. As Ms. Frankel said, there will be an audience to the public that evening for members of the public to offer thoughts or suggestions. That will give us a little bit of time to do another iteration of the plan before something is filed with the state. All of that in advance of the governor making a decision. So I'm not sure how much opportunity they will have to review the plans that are filed on the 31st as part of their decision-making process. But the governor had said very clearly that the decision whether and how to reopen is one that he reserves to himself. So the guidance that we were given by the state requires us to develop 3 plans. So there isn't just a plan, there's 3 plans. One is a plan that we're required to develop a plan for live in-person instruction for all students if possible. The second is a plan for everyone to be in virtual learning in the event that the governor hits that metaphorical stop button and we have to return to learning from home. And the third is a hybrid plan that reduces the number of students in school by having some sort of way of having some students present and other students learning from home and alternating. The advantage of a plan like that, obviously, is that it allows for more social distance, and it also reduces the number of people who might be in contact with someone if a positive case were to occur. So, as I said earlier, the Commissioner of Education believes, and I think this is likely, that any plan is going to be a work in progress and that it's going to iterate over time, and that we're going to be sensitive to and try to be nimble to adjust to what we see as changes in the environment around us, whether that's specific to the Syosset community or specific to Nassau County or specific to the Long Island region. And obviously we'll be working closely with our regional health authorities in order to accomplish that. So the task force had 97 people working on it, members of our staff in multiple roles, the leadership of our PTA, the district's architects walked every one of the 500 classrooms in the district, took measurements, identified things that could be removed from the rooms in order to make more space there. And obviously we spoke with our safety consultants and consulted with our school physician, Dr. Marino. We had building level meetings that included students, and we talked with the building level district administrators. We convened a parent focus group. The Syosset Council of PTAs helped us put that together. And we've had a number of meetings with regional authorities and agencies. So it's obvious that the mission of a school is to maximize our students' intellectual development. It's also obvious that nothing we do in response to this pandemic is going to be as good as what we used to do before the pandemic. So What's discouraging about the work that we've been doing is that we know that as hard as we work, we will not be able to replicate something that we are as proud of as we are our regular full-time instruction. And so our goal, our hope is to get back to that as quickly as we possibly can. But what we've also recognized, and what I've said to the task force, is it's my own feeling that we are 4 months into what may be an 18-month crisis, and that we should anticipate that this coming year, even though I hope this is not what happens, but we should anticipate that this coming year is going to be a year like no other, and prepare ourselves for it. So with that in mind, we're designing for the long haul so that we make this the best possible year it can be for the students who are going to live through this year with us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Bavard, who is our Chief Learning Officer, Deputy Superintendent, and worked with the principals on developing a lot of the learning plans. Oh, I'm sorry. First, I'm going to turn it over to our Assistant Superintendent, Dr. Joe Lamelza, who's going to talk a little bit about mental health. And I'll just set this slide up by saying that the one thing that we know for sure is before we can get to learning, we have to deal with the fact that all of us have lived through a traumatic spring. Students have had their lives disrupted. Students thrive on routine. Students thrive on socialization. Students thrive when they're in the presence of their friends and also in the presence of their teachers. And all of those things have been disrupted this spring. And those will not be without cost. And there's a cost to the adults and there's a cost to the students alike. And we have to be attentive to supporting those mental health needs that we're all going to experience and are experiencing. And we also recognize that there are families that have suffered losses. And those families are not just among the families that we serve in the community, but the families of our staff who are part of our learning community. And that there will be a number of emotional needs that have to be addressed before we can really focus on the work of teaching and learning. So with that said, Dr. Lamelza.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers. Good evening, everyone. Yes, exactly. We really want to stress that this is really paramount in our thinking, how to address this mental health issue going forward. So we really have put a lot of thought into this, and we really are moving forward in ensuring that, you know, we are attentive to our staff needs to be able to develop their abilities to really handle trauma-informed practices and be able to assist our families, our students, and our staff in coming to terms with this situation and how to move forward and how to sort of maintain a balance and a wellness. We're going to rely heavily on our established building level referrals, and also we're going to be looking at more robust ways of maybe screening and gathering data so that we're assured that we are addressing the needs of our community. All of our PPS people, our counselors, social workers, psychologists, we're really going to all put them on the front lines, making sure that they're reaching out, that we are monitoring any needs and concerns. And, you know, most importantly, we can't do it alone. So we really are going to be looking at collaboration with our community-based supports, looking at other avenues that we can develop to ensure that we are taking advantage of everything that's out there. There's a lot of work being done now, even by BOCES, putting together consortium of districts to share information and best practices. Our social worker is currently involved with that directly, and we're feeding that back through our task force. So I do want to stress mental health is really a top priority, and it's something that we are actively involved with and ensuring that we're going to be meeting those needs. Okay.
So I want to go through some of the community input and feedback that we got. Almost 4,000 responses to the survey that we put out. Thank you to everybody who took the time to do that. A lot of comments, total of about a little over 1,600 comments. And we've started to take those comments, characterize them. A lot of them were very generous. We're categorizing them into various kinds of subject matter issues or themes. One theme, as you might imagine, that comes up over and over again is the theme of safety. Another theme that comes up over and over again is concern about having a good instructional experience. So we'll go into that a little bit more depth and detail in just a moment. And as I mentioned earlier, tomorrow we're going to open a thought exchange. This is one of the graphics of how the feedback gets put together for analysis. And it's a way for people to put thoughts out there and get the reactions of other members of the community to those thoughts. And then again, what ends up happening is there are thoughts that end up generating a lot of consistency, and that helps us understand where the community is coming from. So the big questions in the survey, are you planning to send your child to school in the fall? Obviously, we need to know the answer to this question so we have a sense of how to plan. And 73% of parents said that they were planning to send their children to school in the fall. And we'll go a little bit more granular on that in a few minutes. We're also trying to figure out busing. And busing is going to be an enormous challenge. And if it looks like half of parents are not planning on using busing right now, that makes the challenge less extreme. Doesn't solve the busing challenge, but it does make it a little easier than it would be to try to accommodate all children. The flip side is, though, we recognize that if a lot of parents are going to be driving their children to school, there are going to be some serious traffic problems at several of our campuses, some of which already have serious traffic problems. And so we're trying to identify ways that we might be able to mitigate some of the car traffic that's inevitably going to create. We did ask if parents were able to drive their children because of the constraints on busing and the challenges that we're going to experience there. Trying to gauge where we'll be with school lunch and whether parents were going to be comfortable using the school lunch, so again, that we could plan. And then we asked about parents' comfort with sending students with masks. We'll talk about masks a little bit more in a minute, but we were also trying to gauge what parents were thinking about that. We also asked for feedback on a number of different models. One of the often I would see in the comments people saying we weren't all that specific about the models, so it was a little bit hard to comment. And the reason for that is because we're trying to deal with large categories and get a sense of where things are, and then go into model more deeply, and then start to tease out what that model would look like as we get more and more granular with it. There was a lot of support for a full in-person model. Clearly, there are lots of parents who want their kids back in school, and that's quite understandable. There was also, a strong group of people who were nervous about that, and that came through in the survey as well. The model that seemed least attractive to all was a half-day hybrid. And on the one hand, we recognize that there's some things that are attractive about that. You get to see a teacher live and in person every single day, and it's easier to structure a lesson that follows on same day from a lesson that you might have gotten in the morning, some work that you could do at home. But we also recognize that created some tremendous logistical hurdles to do busing midday, both to take kids home and then to bring a different group of kids back, to handle lunch midday, and to try and clean the entire buildings midday. The alternating day hybrid solves a lot of those logistical problems. It is probably easier for a parent to manage in terms of a commute that you might have to do. Half day is probably much more challenging to arrange childcare for on the off times. So that clearly had more support of the two hybrid models. The alternating day clearly had more support of the two. And then obviously a lot of dissatisfaction with remaining home or remaining virtual, although there was also a group of parents that felt strongly about the virtual program. So again, a little bit of a split there. So diving in a little more deeply, one of the questions we asked parents was, how comfortable are you sending your students back? And these are a little bit of a complicated chart. They'll make more sense as I explain them. On the left-hand side, we're asking just how comfortable are you from a safety perspective with sending your child back? And parents gave us a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, with a 5 being the most comfortable. Then we looked at the parents who gave a 1 on comfort, and how many of those parents said, yes, they're sending their child back anyway? And it was about 11%. So even in the group of parents who are least comfortable with safety, 11% of those parents are nevertheless planning on sending their children to school. So if parents were a 2, they were about 50-50, 45%. And if it's 3 or higher, 80% or more likely, 89% or more, almost 90% likely to send their child to school. So that gives us a sense of, if it's a 3, a 4, or a 5, then in all likelihood, that parent is sending their child to school. Same kind of chart, but now asking not about comfort with coming to school, but asking about comfort with virtual learning. And what jumps off this chart to me is that the parents who are most comfortable with virtual learning are also the parents who are least likely to send their children to school. So in some ways, there's a match there between parents who are uncomfortable sending their children to school, but more comfortable than most with the virtual learning. So depending on what the state permits in the future, and I'll come back to that point, that population of parents may be comfortable with the virtual education to begin with. We did ask more globally, based on what you experienced last spring, what concerns do you have learning from home? Obviously, the number one is the lack of interaction with teachers, no surprise there, lack of interaction and socialization with peers, the emotional impact of not going to school, and the difficulty of staying engaged, which I kind of marry up with the 1-2 lines down amount of screen time and pace too slow. Very hard to stay engaged for long periods of time watching a screen. And even for older children that have better executive function skills, what we call the ability to stay focused, still very hard to put tremendous number of hours day in and day out staring at a screen and trying to stay attentive. And then we asked the flip side of that question, what was most successful? And obviously parents thought that live teacher-led instruction was the most successful. So 55% of parents rated this with their first choice, but that means that 45% of parents didn't rate it as their first choice. And those ratings are sprinkled over the rest of the approaches, small group work, student connection activities, pre-recorded lessons, etc. So while teacher-led live instruction was clearly the clear favorite, a lot of these other modalities were also some parents' favorite. And I think it speaks to the fact that not all of our children are alike, and parents are recognizing that some children work in different modalities better than others. All of this is informing us as we think about a model that may not be all one thing or all another, but might have elements of a number of these things as we try to address a number of different learners and learning styles. From a health and safety perspective, obviously, before we can get back to in-person learning, we want to make the buildings as safe as they possibly can be. Everyone's physical safety is paramount. And the challenge is that there's no way that we can eliminate risk altogether. And we all know that. We're living through and in this time together. And the state right now has, the state has and the region both have a little over a 1% rate of COVID in the population that gets tested. So we know that there is some virus, small amount, but some virus that is still circulating. So what can we do? What's within our control? Everything that we can do that is within our control to minimize that risk, we want to do. So we'll go through a little bit of what we've been working on in order to make the physical plant safe as we come back. So I'm trying to remember if this is my slide or someone else's slide. Ms. Bavard?
Dr. Rogers, this is you.
This is still me. Okay. One of the things that's required in the state guidance is to have every person have their temperature taken every single day before coming to school. Obviously, there's two ways to do that. That can happen at school or that can happen at home. The guidance says that the state's preference would be to have temperature taken at home rather than have temperature taken at school. Now, in the summer school program, we have had a lot of, and at the SCOPE program, we have had a lot of success with taking temperatures at school. And we use handheld, no-touch thermometers that give us almost instantaneous read, and then we're able to establish that someone doesn't have a fever. That, we already know that that's not necessarily perfect, because there are some people who may be asymptomatic. We also know that it's possible you can take a fever reducing medication like aspirin or Tylenol, and makes the fever go down. And so that wouldn't be perfect, but the state is requiring us to take temperatures. The only way we can be assured if somebody has taken a temperature at home is if they fill out a form prior to coming to school. Now, no one's expecting a kindergartner to fill out an online form, but we would expect parents to fill out a daily questionnaire for their child before coming to school. And the questionnaire, and we're already using this with staff, I'm filling it out every morning myself, just goes through the checklist of things that might present a risk. Symptoms that are consistent with COVID, obviously having a positive test for COVID, coming into contact with someone who subsequently had a positive test, or traveling to New York, or having been in one of the states that is on the state's quarantine list. Any of these things will result in a red flag, and you can see what the screen for the app looks like. You can do these on a smartphone, and you know, at the building, we would be able to tell, because we would have a list of people who filled out the app, and if there were any people who unfortunately had to answer yes to one of these 4 questions, we would know who they were. Our hope would be that they wouldn't come to school at all if they answered yes to any of these questions, but if they did answer yes, then we would intercept them at the front of the building. So what we will do for the first several weeks of school, I don't know how the questionnaire will work, how well it will work for parents of multiple children. No one's done this before. So we're going to take temperatures at school, and we're going to use the questionnaire both. And we'll evaluate where we are several weeks in and see how it's going. But one way or another, we don't need to collect temperatures. We don't need to know what you were yesterday and what you are tomorrow. We just need to know that you have not had a fever. And the state has set the temperature at which they will consider someone to be ineligible to come into school. That is at 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's not something that is optional for us. That's the number that has been picked by the state. So as I said, parents need to take their children's temperature prior to sending the child to school or to the bus stop. We don't want a parent giving a child a couple of Tylenol and then sending them to the bus. If they have a fever, you should presume that they're not to be sent to school. If a child has a fever of 100 or more, they can't come to school, they cannot ride the bus. As I said, at school, we'll be taking student temperatures with touchless thermometers. And if for some reason, let's say you took the temperature at home and there was no fever, but by the time you got to school, there was, we would take the student, and every building has identified an isolation space that is separate from the regular nurse's office, where a student who is exhibiting any kind of a symptom would be isolated until the parent can come and pick the child up from school. And then if for some reason a student or a staff member did become COVID positive at some point during the year, whether they were at school or elsewhere, there is a protocol that the state has put together for when someone can return to school, whether a staff member or a student. And obviously we would follow that protocol. So one of the pieces of guidance that has been changing and changed a little bit again yesterday is about protocols for safety in the classroom. And the guidance requires social distancing whenever possible. It requires masks whenever social distancing is not possible. It requires masks on the bus. It does not require masks if social distancing can be achieved, or if another way of achieving social distancing can be accomplished. And that's through the use of clear plastic partitions. Our goal is to try and have 2 of these 3 things in place at all times, if at all possible. So the state is only requiring 1 of the 3 things to be in place at all times, although again, they're changing a little bit of how they are wording that, and we need to get some additional interpretation of that. But the expectation would be that when moving anywhere, students would wear masks because, you know, whether they're in the hallway, whether they're on the bus, whether they're entering school, we would also try to supplement that with social distance, have people walk 6 feet apart in the hallways, have people wait out in front of the building 6 feet apart, have people exit the buses with space in front of themselves and the child in front of them. We would try to observe this 6 feet, but we will always observe mask wearing whenever there's some kind of movement. Once students arrive in a classroom and are settled, the guidance says that students may remove their masks during instruction or for breaks or for eating, provided that there is adequate social distance of at least 6 feet. So we would supplement that by creating these partitions, which would wrap around 3 sides of a rectangular desk and further protect each student from emitting something that would travel through the building. Dr. Rufo, I believe this is your slide.
Yes, thank you. We will be reinforcing those everyday preventative actions that will help keep us healthy, and those actions that are recommended by the CDC and the New York State Department of Health. And certainly proper hand hygiene is essential. And we will be deploying portable hand washing stations throughout the district. And we will also, our architects are going through the buildings to identify those spaces where more permanent hand washing stations can be installed. We will be training in proper hand washing with age appropriate tools, whether they be signage in the buildings at appropriate places or online videos. We're looking at a variety of different methods for that. In all of our newly constructed bathrooms, there are touch-free faucets, touch-free paper towel and soap dispensers. In our existing restrooms, we have touch-free paper towels and soap dispensers, and that's going on at, that transition is going on now. We have hand sanitizer dispensers available in every classroom, office space, common area, entrances. And while we will have a policy of no sharing of personal items, we will be reinforcing that we're sharing healthy practices to keep us all safe.
So we're going to go through now, now that we've taken the parent feedback, we've talked a little bit about the safety protocols, we'll talk a little bit about instruction and the outline of the 3 different plans, the in-person plan, the hybrid plan, and the virtual plan before we send these to the state. So Ms. Bavard.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers. So I want to publicly thank the members of the task force who have worked so hard with us over this long period. We've had 6 full task force meetings with all 97 participants. We've had 1 just subgroup meeting where each subgroup dove into the work together. And so we're really happy to share tonight that we've vetted all of the options. We've looked at them from the conceptual framework of what will the student experience be like in these different options, knowing that, of course, our first choice would be back to normal, but that is not an option that we have. So we went from the conceptual frame of the student experience all the way down through to tactical. What are the tactical boots on the ground issues that we have to face, and what are potential solutions to those issues? So after all this work, we are sharing tonight that we can bring our elementary students back in person, all of them every day, Monday through Friday. At our middle school, we found a way to bring all of our students back in person Monday through Friday. Because of the space issues and the amount of coursework that goes on and having to separate students into different spaces, we're going to have normal school hours at the middle school, but we're going to have to shift from a 9-period day to an 8-period day in order to have enough space for the learning for our middle school students. At the high school, we looked long and hard at the space. We looked at the number of students in the building, and we prioritized preserving the richness of the program and the coursework and the choices that our high school students have. In order to do that, we're going to recommend an alternating day hybrid model for the high school. Students will come in every other day, and on the day that they are not in school, they'll be in e-learning experiences with their teachers from home.
And so I would just like to say, when we looked at this plan that we're required to put together, there is no way to observe social distancing at the high school and have an in-person model. So that's why we were left with no choice but to choose a hybrid model for the high school. And the middle school change will result in a change in program. There will be some courses that will not be able to run in an 8-period day rather than a 9-period day. But the only way we could preserve a 9-period day and all of the coursework that's associated with that would be to go to an alternating schedule at the middle school as well. And we felt it would be better if, and again, as we're building this model, we're required to build an in-person model. This is what it would take to have an in-person model at the middle school. It can be done, but it does come with this one constraint, which is moving to an 8-period day. Ms. Bavard?
So the next slide is by Charlie Cardillo.
Okay, so good evening. Interestingly enough, as we speak about in-person instruction, the CDC released guidelines today which strongly support schools reopening and having in-person instruction, with one red flag. In areas where there's substantial and uncontrolled transmission of the virus, they're saying naturally schools should be closed. So you see really what's taking place for in-person instruction here in Syosset. Class sizes are determined by the social distancing requirement and square footage. So as an example, where there may have been 24 students in a class last year at September 2019, as we open this year in September 2020, it could conceivably be 12 in one class and 12 in another room as we go through it. In order to do this, we have fully certified staff to maximize the in-person instruction. We have a combination of in-person class sizes appropriate for the individual space, small group maximized. We see K through 8, lunch is going to be eaten in the classrooms. At the high school, they're working out a plan which will be students in locations socially distant in small settings. And a number of spaces will be identified by the high school administration there. And in essence, we'll also see students, particularly at the elementary and the middle school level, remain in a homeroom space, not necessarily for the whole day, but for the most part, teachers will be rotating to whatever extent practical.
Thank you. So we're going to focus now on the elementary program. So the first thing that we did with elementary, as the task force was working on instruction, the architects were walking every building and looking at every classroom, measuring, looking at all the spaces that could be repurposed for instructional spaces, as Charlie said, because we have to split many classes, and making recommendations. So the task force was working on the model. The architects were working on the space, and then Charlie and I met with every building principal, all 7, went through classroom by classroom, space by space at each elementary school. And when elementary students come to school, they will be spaced differently, as Charlie referred to, than last fall. They will have a teacher working with them, and we're using this methodology of co-pilot. So there'll be the teacher of record, which would be the homeroom teacher, paired up with a teacher that will be working in the second space in order for the students to have that same experience, collaborating with the teacher of record or the homeroom teacher and working with both groups of students. We know that elementary students have to keep socially distant, so we're going to try to do as much as possible in the classroom. However, we know that they also need breaks. So we will be having teachers come to them in classrooms. The special area teachers, lunch will happen in the classroom, but it's not practical to think that an elementary student will sit in a 6-inch circle the entire day. We know they have to get up, they have to move. So if students do leave that classroom area, they will have masks, they will take a break, we will give recess opportunities, the classroom will be cleaned And when they come back, they'll resume learning in that space.
Well, as we go into the in-person in the middle school, there were great challenges in order to try to have our students at both Southwoods and HBT. But again, Adele, myself, Teresa Kerr, we met with the principals, and we were able to really work through a challenge that was out there. So we're shifting from a 9-period day to an 8-period day. The core care classes are all intact. The impact is on electives, which we feel that this would be hopefully a 1-year move to the 8 periods, and then back in 2021 and 2022, we can continue the tradition that Syosset has had with a 9-period day, and the electives such as online finance, technology, courses that we have authorization through the Commissioner's regulations to offer on a yearly basis, and also have the opportunity now not to offer them. So some electives will be postponed. The key thing is, again, is that the space in the building will, again, be consistent with appropriate social distancing. And again, as mentioned, classes will be split between 2 physical areas and staffed in teams. And again, lunch in classrooms.
Okay, so the high school presents a big challenge because there are 2,200 students in the high school. It's a very large high school. There are currently 97 classrooms at the high school. So think of the high school as having almost 100 classrooms. And in each of the 9 periods, nearly all of those classrooms are in use. And so if we were to say that the classroom capacity is cut in half, then the number of physical classrooms needs to double. Now, obviously, there's no way to double those classrooms, and there's no way to, through tents or outdoor learning or something like that, somehow replicate 97 more classrooms. There's just physically, logistically, no way to do it. And therefore, there is no choice but to do some sort of hybrid model at the high school, because there's simply insufficient space to have all kids in the building and maintain social distance. So what we're working on right now is the alternating day that was preferred to the half day by the survey data that we got. And we know that the high school operates on red day, white day, so that if you have an every other day course, that might be on white days or it might be on red days. So you'd need to have, in a 4-day cycle, 2 red days and 2 white days, 2 in-person days, and 2 learning from home days. And so you have to arrange it so that you get 1 in-person day on a red day and 1 in-person day on a white day, 1 learning from home red, 1 learning from home white. What that looks like is, for the student, it'll be every other day in the building, but the daily schedule will go red, red, white, white, so that the every other day matches up with when the student is there. So our second plan is to develop a hybrid at all levels. And obviously we fleshed it out at the high school, but we'll go a little bit more deeply into some of the other choices for a hybrid model.
Yeah, so New York State does require that we do this. When we looked at this with the task force, we did vet this for all levels, and we vetted both the half-day hybrid and the alternate day hybrid. At this time, we feel it's a much stronger offering with our K-8 program to do the in-person.
So since the state has said that they're looking at the hybrid model as a possible interim step if rates start to go up and they need to reduce the number of people that are together. But it is hard for us to imagine, since we're able to achieve social distance with all students, it's hard to see where this hybrid model would be preferable to the in-person model. So as I mentioned earlier, we did go more deeply into, at the high school, the alternate day model, because there is no possibility of having all students in person. It would be alternating days. Students would be learning from home on the alternating days. We're working through what that might look like. It may be different for college level classes than it is for classes that meet every day. We're certainly trying to find a way to maximize that time and maximize the in-person time with teachers. So to the extent that teachers' lessons often look like a brief lecture to get the work set up and then students working in group with the teacher coaching them, is there a way to do more of that teacher directed learning while they're in person and have more of that independent learning occur while they're learning from home and out of the classroom? Only the advantage of this model, obviously, is that it reduces by half the number of students in the school building on any given day. That makes passing time easier. That makes the busing easier. It makes the drop off and arrival and scanning of badges and scanning of temperatures easier on any given day. And in those buildings, including the high school, where it is possible to go in a circle, we're looking at creating one-way hallways. So there are some buildings where the hallways are an out and back, and there is no way to go in a circle. But if you can go in a circle, then by having a one-way hallway, you're unlikely to come face to face with a fellow student or a fellow staff person as you're in the building. And then fully remote instruction. So Ms. Bavard? Yep.
Yeah, so should we need to go fully virtual, that will be a decision that will be made for us. And there's a couple of things that we've learned from the spring. So we have surveyed our staff, we surveyed our parents, we got a lot of good feedback, and we learned by doing, just by iterating the model and working with the model. So we'll take all that learning from the spring and make improvements. We want to improve resources for teachers so that they can have more resources online at the click of a fingertip. They've had more time to think through the implications of virtual instruction and get more comfortable with it. And we also want to improve the experience for parents, really to streamline that communication that we have with our parents, especially for our elementary parents, so that there's one place per grade level where they can see what the schedule is, click into the Google Meets. So we've done a lot of work to coordinate the way we would communicate with virtual instruction going forward. The next slide, this slide shows the work that we are doing this summer in order to make those improvements. You can see we've had many teachers involved in curriculum writing and development so that we can be malleable for whatever design we come back to. We've had over 85 elementary teachers. Some have completed their projects, some are still working on their projects, doing virtual grade level lessons, project-based learning, which we know is so engaging for our elementary students, really working on those reading and writing units. We're developing resources, open source resources for teachers in science, virtual tools. That small group instruction has been so effective for us. We wanted to give teachers more resources and tools to have effective small groups in the virtual world. And at secondary, we've really been, again, developing curriculum, both at the middle level and the high school level, to run advisory groups in a virtual environment should it be needed. We've worked on content areas of social studies, math, microeconomics, technology, science, lots of teachers involved in this work, this thinking and this work to be ready and prepared for the fall.
So one of the things that we heard as we took feedback from parents, from students, from teachers on the virtual learning program is that a lot of teacher time was used trying to build and generate lessons that translated well into the online environment, because the lessons that had been planned and had been prepared for the live environment just didn't translate well. And that was incredibly time consuming and chewed up time that teachers could have been using much more productively with children. So our hope is by doing a lot of this work over the summer that we've created large libraries and reservoirs of lessons that teachers would be able to take advantage of. And that instead of a lot of this duplicated effort of every teacher trying to find something, that we do something that is more coordinated and at a district level that every teacher can then take advantage of, so that they have, it frees up their time to spend more on the children who are in front of them. The second thing that we heard loud and clear was the challenges that parents and children had navigating our system, because we moved online very quickly. Google Classroom was, for the most part, our primary platform, but some teachers were putting assignments on at different times of day, and that could be confusing. Some teachers were scheduling their Google Meets through the calendar, and others were scheduling them through Google Classroom. And again, what we're also working on is trying to streamline all of that. And so we'll hopefully have in place a series of pages that are sort of home bases for parents to be able to go and see assignments in one place, schedules in one place, have a much easier time understanding the work that's in front of their children because it's organized, and we've found ways to keep everybody roughly doing things in the same way and roughly at the same time, which should make it easier. The other thing that we learned in the spring was that there were literally hundreds of questions back and forth between children and their teachers in a given day, and that written feedback versus just the feedback that you might be able to give in a classroom, even if there were that many questions in a classroom, a lot easier to handle, and enormous amounts of time was spent doing that feedback, written feedback with individual students. So what we're hoping to do is, again, have more of these lessons available to teachers so that less time is spent in the development of these lessons, and then the imposition of writing back and forth with students is not quite so burdensome because we've taken some things off the teacher's plate.
Okay, I think I'm picking up this one on the assessment and the intervention. So, we are very cognizant of the concerns with skill development and pace of learning after this interruption. So we are going to be very attentive in the beginning of the school year in September to really utilize our curriculum, our measures that are available through our curriculum. Our teachers will be focused on literacy and math, and we really are going to start collecting student performance data to get a baseline for their progress. The one advantage of the students returning K-8 is they will be small groups. So it's almost a natural opportunity, but we certainly are going to have additional small group instruction available. We want to be there quickly to intervene, to compensate for any loss of skills that we've identified, focusing again on literacy and math. By early October, our plan is, once there's been a sufficient chunk of instructional time, that we would administer our standardized measure of academic progress and growth to really then get a very firm measure on where our students are so that we can plan going forward. And again, then utilizing our multi-tiered system of support, you've heard that term, of really identifying students and monitoring their progress, looking at the progress data, and then just intervene quickly and make sure that they're getting the interventions and the small group attention that they need. So that's an ongoing aspect of our instructional plan. And then as far as special education goes, the state has been consistent in all of their guidance. They are asking us to make sure that we are continuing to provide special education and related services to the greatest extent possible. So they are recognizing the incredible, strain on the system in terms of us being able to do business as usual. But certainly our intention is to meet those requirements in the IEP. We're looking at our special classes, our elementary special classes, should we need to go to a hybrid model, and our high school life skill classes as part of the alternative, that they would come on the alternate day, that they would come every day. So again, we're looking at our most needy students. We want to make sure that they are getting the support that they need on a regular basis. So those students that have significant needs that would have them in a special class setting, there's something that's a program that we're going to be running every day, regardless of the hybrid model or not. Our plan going forward, again, to limit exposure to visitors coming into the building, exposure to possible virus to the virus. All of our meetings, our CPSC meetings, our CSC meetings, our 504 meetings, any teacher meetings, they're all going to be held remotely. We are going to continue, of course, to honor all of the state regulations. The parent procedural safeguard notices will be in place, the prior written notices, all of that guarantees of parent rights and student rights to a free and appropriate public education will be in place. And we are then going to be accepting our CSE referrals and getting back into our assessment process to be identifying students who may be in need of special education services. As far as E&L goes, again, that's continuing. We're going to be providing the level of support based on the units of study requirements, based on the needs of the students as they're identified. The communication, of course, will continue in the language of preference of the family. The services then are going to continue to match those needs, as I said earlier. Again, all timelines, the regulations, the Part 154 that identify placement, notification will continue. And of course, as I said earlier, all of our students, so the social emotional end, their well-being is paramount. So we're going to be certainly making concerted efforts to keep all of that at the forefront. And then there is a component to the guidance that speaks to students that may be unable to attend school in person. So if there's medical issues that are impacting the student's ability to come to school, concerns with family members who might be high risk. We have plans for students that might need especially more robust PPEs, a different setting. We're looking at providing the home or remote instruction. There's always the option for parents to choose homeschooling. And if parents are choosing not to send them back, then we are going to be looking at making our plans for remote learning to be available.
I would just say on that point, in the conference call with the commissioner today, the guidance that the state gave is somewhat ambiguous. In most places, the guidance says that choice will only be open to parents of students who are in high-risk categories. So the question has been asked of the state whether that option is open more broadly, and the commissioner herself said that that's something that they have also requested that the governor clarify. So we're waiting on that clarification along with the Commissioner of Education, but obviously that's an important piece that parents would want and need to know in order to make some plans. So obviously, as soon as that becomes clarified for us, we'll try and make that information available to the community. So to that point, we added this Q&A slide for those who might just thumb through the slides and not hear the audio. Can you, without a medical condition, still choose? The Department of Health guidance doesn't say that. There's a place where it's ambiguous, and again, we're looking for clarification. Dr. Rufo?
Thank you. Transportation does present certain unique challenges that we are working to address through the implementation of new protocols, one of them being low density routing. We're looking at placing one student per seat. So on a large 66 passenger bus, that would be 22 students if there's one student in a seat, with the exception for siblings that can sit together. All students and drivers and bus staff will be required to wear masks. Students, parents, and staff will observe social distancing, both while they're loading the buses, unloading, and at the bus stop itself. And we'll be instituting some training protocols for that. School buses will be routinely cleaned and disinfected by Huntington Coach, the district's transportation contractor. There will be new arrival and dismissal protocols, and those will be unique to each school, although they all have the common element of maintaining social distancing. And as it was stated before, we're anticipating a larger number of parents driving their students and perhaps increase in student walkers. And we are developing protocols to make a more manageable traffic pattern between buses and cars.
Okay, so last spring we know that there was tremendous disappointment here in Syosset throughout Long Island with the cancellation of spring sports. It was disappointing for the student athletes, particularly the seniors, disappointing for the coaches, disappointing for their parents and the Syosset community. So as we go into the fall around the country, a number of areas where there's already been a surge in the virus have made determination that fall sports has been moved already to the spring. The New York State Public Association here in New York, Athletic Association, has delayed sports until September 21st, and they'll make a determination in mid-September whether the fall sports season will begin on September 21st or whether we will be offering 3 seasons of sports beginning in January 1st and getting into the spring. So to be determined. Hopefully we'll be able to have sports here beginning September 21st. In addition, one of the key elements is with the high school on an alternating day, we have then some athletes on a particular day who will be trying to get back, who are not in school. They're doing virtual learning. So we're going to make every effort that the athletes who are on their virtual learning will be able to get back to school, to be able to practice. The coaches and everyone will be making an extraordinary commitment to work with these students who are involved in the program so they can be at practices on a daily basis if we should have the fall sports season begin. Again, with the locker room and appropriate social distancing that will be monitored. And again, with masks, as we look at masks, again, the appropriateness there is if a team is on a bus, the student athletes will be mandatory on any student on a bus to be having a mask on as we go through that. Now, as we move to music, the challenge becomes, as we look at ensemble groups, is as we've now made a commitment, or we're presenting a commitment that the students, or all of our students, can have in-person instruction in K-8 in the 7 elementary and the 2 middle schools. We're maximizing the use of every room in these buildings. So the challenge it will be, as we look at the ensemble groups in band, chorus, and orchestra, as to when, where this can occur. And we'll be evaluating this throughout August and even into September because the ensemble groups at the elementary level wouldn't begin to early October to begin with. And we'll be making determinations as we go through the latter part of the summer into the beginning of the school year. And then finally, as we look at the ensemble groups, key items become naturally social distancing and the no sharing of wind instruments and the cleaning of these stands and instruments for the students who are involved in our outstanding music program. So as we look at events and visitors, we see 5 major categories here. And I think in this particular category, this is going to be consistent throughout all of Nassau County. So when we talk about field trips, at this time, Syosset's canceled all field trips until further notice. Co-curricular activities, I know we want to make every effort to have co-curricular activities run, whether that's done virtually in small groups, alternating days. But the commitment is to have students be provided the opportunity for the after-school activities. Large group events, all those large group events will be canceled. Let's just give some examples of that. We know the guidance department in September historically has had 4 parent meetings for each of the classes, freshmen, sophomore, juniors, seniors, and the parents. Attendance typically 600 people or more. So these presentations will be done virtually, as will many of the other presentations that we traditionally would have had in person. The community use of schools, unfortunately for now, the use of the facilities are discontinued until further notice. That was the case in the spring. And then for school visitors, naturally with everything that's involved, we're limiting visitors to participating in essential or necessary functions, such as picking up your child. All parent meetings will be online. So you can see as a result of all that's taken place related to the virus and so on, we've had to make these kind of limitations in a number of these different categories.
So this is our final slide, and I know the board members probably want to get to work on this. We will post all this online. We'll post the survey results online as well. We'll start the thought exchange tomorrow. We're still in conversation with scope right now. I'm sure that'll be a big question for parents and board members. Not there yet. And we're waiting for, as I said earlier, a lot of clarification. And one thing that's absent from this presentation is a lot of granular detail about safety protocols and health protocols more specifically beyond just the temperature taking. And there are a dozen places in the Department of Health guidance, the State Department of Health guidance, where it says collaborate with your local Department of Health, meaning the Nassau County Department of Health. So I did have a meeting with Commissioner Eisenstein last week. I have another one scheduled next week. We're right now anticipating that there will probably be some, there's no point for the Department of Health negotiating with 56 school districts in Nassau County. So we're anticipating that some sort of document will come from them. And we're also anticipating that a state level document is going to come from the New York State Center on School Health that will outline a lot of those protocols. We may have to tailor them because of our space and size or capabilities, but the major medical decisions that need to go in there are something that the guidance says we have to have assistance and collaboration with the Department of Health in order to pull that together. So that's started, but it's not completed yet. And so those more granular kinds of protocols will be available. As soon as we finalize them, we'll certainly make them available to you, the board, and the community at large. So that concludes our outline. As I said at the beginning, this is a status report on the work that we've done so far. A little bit of a clarification on the many things that we're still waiting for from external authorities before we can really finalize this, but want to get your feedback before we go any further.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rogers. The presentation was as thorough as it could be under the circumstances. And I'd like to also thank the staff and the administrators and the nurses and the PTA leadership and PTA focus groups and our consultants for doing just such a tremendous amount of work under great pressure because of everyone's expectations, including your own. We all have high expectations, we were leaders before. We were leaders in the virtual learning processes that we put in place during the quarantine, and I have no doubt that the plans that we put in place on July 31st are going to be spectacular and also leading the pack. So thank you all for that. Thank you also for the parents. If I didn't mention that, we received a ton of suggestions and really thoughtful remarks about what they'd like to see for this upcoming year, and also their thoughts on what we've done in the past. So I'm sure that all of those comments were considered and are still being considered by the board as well as by the task force. So I'll just start us off with just a question about the app, the questionnaire that the parents are going to be filling out every day. You know, I looked up what COVID-19 symptoms were. There's tons, from the severe ones that you've heard of, you know, difficulty breathing, losing taste and smell, to ones that we experience all the time, like headaches. So are we going to be clear on what symptoms we're looking at for the parents to know whether to answer yes or no? Are we going to be looking as low as a headache? And if the child has a headache, they can't come to school? Or are we going to be looking at only, you know, the top 5 most severe symptoms? Because I have to imagine, you know, putting something like a headache down when the student may know that they regularly get headaches, or, you know, they're, you know, hormonal, or they didn't get enough sleep the night before and they have a headache, so they have to stay home from school. in that circumstance.
Yep. So the language in the app right now says, since your last day of work or last visit here, have you had any of these possible COVID-19 symptoms? And then this is underlined, to a greater intensity or level of concern than what you might normally experience. And then it goes through the symptoms: cough, shortness of breath, fever, chills, repeated shaking with chills, muscle pain, headache, sore throat, new loss of taste or smell, diarrhea, nausea, or vomiting. So I think the key there is that this is something that is unusual, unexpected, deviation from the norm. But the most important thing, the thing that the state is requiring us to do, is taking temperature. So I think that's the place where our focus would be. And with this attestation, I think it's a way of making sure that daily staff, students, just take an inventory of yourself. How are you feeling? Is everything normal? Are you feeling okay? Do you feel like you should take your temperature? You're going to take your temperature anyway. So it's just a check to make sure that people self-monitor and don't just, get on the routine and come blindly into the building because that's what you do every morning.
Okay, thank you. I'll take questions. Yep, Chris DeFilippo.
Thank you, Tracy. Just a note also on that app, I use a similar app every day. It takes me less than 2-3 minutes, and I think if you do click, if you have a headache, if you don't have the temperature, it's not going to prevent you from going to work. It's just, on a list. One is, are we going one by one question, Tracy, or?
Yeah, I think it's best if everyone gets a chance to ask a question.
Gotcha.
And we'll keep going
Okay.
round and round.
Okay. I wanted to ask about on the special education, and by the way, the teachers, I hope we consider them essential workers. They have a big job ahead of them, and we're going to need to rely upon them to get this job done, to educate the community. And between the district and the government, I hope they get fairly compensated for that. So the question I have with special education is, according to the guideline, certain students are to be prioritized for in-classroom instruction, whereas these students are for younger students, lower income, special education students, English language learners, and those with limited access to technology. And the last part, the technology can be a big concern. Just quick, I know that having these Zoom meetings, I had Optimum 200 and my video would be freezing. It's not freezing now because I had to up it up to a much higher level with a different carrier. But, I could see a family with the parents working from home and students 2 or 3 using laptops being a big drain on the connectivity in the home getting into the school, and that could be an issue. So getting back to the special education students, how are we prioritizing that? Because I heard that in some cases, we may be shifting some of it to virtual learning if they qualify for in classroom and are a priority, how are we balancing that?
Yeah, I'll ask Dr. Lamelza to answer in a little bit more detail, but I'll just, in broad strokes, if the governor orders us to do all virtual, I'm assuming that will be a blanket order for all students. So the governor's order was what allowed us to do the extended school year program in person this summer for some of our more disabled students. But we have thought about the small population of our most disabled students and the alternating day program and how best to serve them. And I think we've hit on a different model for them. So Joe, Dr. Lamelza, if you could just take us through that, please.
Right. With the understanding that our K-8 is going to be coming in every day in direct. So those students that have the most significant needs would be receiving their services within their program as per their IEP. There might be some, variability, but it would be very slight. The big concern was the high school, if we are moving to the alternate day. So that's why our plan recommends that our life skills students, which are our students in our special class at the high school, that have significant needs, also have needs for transition, for work-based learning, for post-school outcomes, that they attend every day, and that we continue to address their transition needs, their social emotional needs, behavioral needs. So that really, I think, is very important, very critical for those students, because they certainly meet that category of having the highest needs.
Thank you.
Okay.
Susan Falco.
Hi, first I wanted to thank you because this is such an overwhelming task, and you guys, the presentation was really wonderful and very informative. As I was listening, it seems that a lot of the students could possibly have to miss school because they were exposed to somebody, or they have to quarantine, or they may not feel well. What provisions are going to be made for those students who might have to quarantine for 14 days at a school? What kind of schooling will be provided for them? Will they be able to jump on to online learning? How's that going to work for the kids that are missing school, that aren't sick but can't go to school for whatever reason?
Yeah, the answer to that question will depend on the answer we get from the state on whether parents can keep children home more generally. So we're imagining that there is going to be a population of staff that have some underlying health condition and who are looking to have an accommodation from the district, and that there will be a population of students that have an underlying condition. And the hope would be that those two, the staff and students, would be roughly in proportion to one another. And so there would be, even if we're in person, there will be some aspect of the learning that's going on that's virtual, by virtue of the fact that these are populations that have these underlying health conditions that put them at higher risk. So I'm imagining that a student who is leaving school for 14 days because they're in a quarantine would then jump into one of these virtual classrooms. Hopefully we would have at least one of these classrooms at every grade level for elementary, and at the very least with all the core subjects at the secondary level, so that there would be some continuity of instruction there. And the regular classroom teacher, undoubtedly, as we do now, when a student is sick and misses work, the teachers send work home so that they keep up with the class, and that wouldn't go away either. This actually ends up being an enhancement to that, because there's going to be some sort of virtual instruction going on simultaneously in parallel.
Carol.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rogers and Dr. Lamelza, as well as Adele and Charlie for the presentation. Just to add on to Susan's question, so if those students are can't attend school because they're quarantined for any reasons, whether they are tested positive, waiting for results, or they're being in contact with those tested positive, if for the most unfortunate event that they are tested positive for COVID, what do we do in the secondary level to their attendance? As we know, attendance is, we count the attendance, especially the Regents credit-bearing courses. And then if they are absent for more than 12 days, then they don't get that credit. I don't know if the state ed has given us guidance in terms of alleviating that the stress on the students and the parents, and like that.
Yeah, the state, two things on that, and it's not as fully fleshed out an answer as the question was. So the state has said that they're going to give us flexibility on the 180 minutes a week of instruction that a secondary course is supposed to have. And so that flexibility also helps us with thinking about the 990 hours a year requirement. So that flexibility exists within the secondary program as a first layer. The second thing that the state has told us is they want us to have attendance policies for student and staff that don't encourage people to come to school sick. So whereas a year ago, we might have said to somebody, you've got a sniffle, you need to rally and just get in there. And now we would say, you've got a sniffle, you need to rally and stay home. So we're looking to put in place policies that don't penalize people for doing the right thing, which is staying home in order to protect others. So that's not just for a student who would be self-quarantining, but that would be for a student who doesn't feel quite right today, and maybe today's a good day to just stay home and see if the, whatever was happening resolves itself in a day and then go back to school.
Chris Ulrich?
Yeah, Dr. Rogers. So I know it's been a struggle with the high school and the alternating schedule and fitting everybody in. We've had the guidance from the state, which I believe is that we have to use at least one of three methods: social distancing, mask, or the shield around the desk. Obviously, we want to be as careful as possible to protect people as much as possible. That said, we also have concerns with ninth graders. They're going through the hardest transition. Is there something we can do to fit them where maybe we reduce the amount of social distancing and maybe 5 feet versus 6, but we're using a mask and we're using a shield? So any one of those is considered adequate protection. We're looking to do 2 or more. If for the ninth graders, we're doing a mask and a shield, are we able to fit them in the classrooms?
So if you think of the ninth grade as being, a quarter, obviously, of the high school, and of the roughly 100 classrooms that we have at the high school, then 25 of those classrooms belong to the freshmen. That's going to actually be all wrong, but it's good enough for the purposes of illustration. So we would need to identify 25 more classrooms in order to create half as many kids in each of those classrooms. So obviously there aren't 25 more classrooms out there to be had at our high school because we're so full already. The guidance from the state, and it did say, one of the three, and that's in our presentation, it's one of the three. The guidance did change late yesterday afternoon. We've all nicknamed this the red memo because they put the new language in red, and it seems to emphasize the social distancing much more than the previous memo did. So what we've done is we have, again, this thing is barely 24 hours old. So we have asked the attorneys to take a look at this. This was also mentioned on the call with the commissioner today. And the sense I get is that the state is becoming, is now emphasizing the 6 foot of social distance more than they did in the previous memo. That said, there still appears to be a little bit of flexibility in this language, but that's why I think we need to get some interpretation of it to make sure that we're following it correctly. That said, I don't know that going from 6 feet to 5 feet necessarily makes the class size large enough that you can double the number of kids. So if it's a room that needed to have 24 kids and now it only fits 12, if you go from 6 feet to 5, maybe 12 becomes 15, but I don't think it becomes 24. So it may, even if you decided to take a little bit of a different approach with the social distancing, I don't know that it solves the problem of freeing up 25 classrooms.
Rob?
And the extra 25 are because you're assuming we have to split a class in half into 2 rooms.
Correct.
Because under normal circumstances, there are enough rooms.
Yeah, under normal circumstances where we have 27, sometimes 30 kids in a class, we have enough classes. We use them all. Almost all the time we use them all, but we do have enough classes. If we say, well, if you look at a room and you say, we've instantly said that the room capacity is dropped by half, then to have the same number of kids, we need double the number of rooms. And so I was just doubling the number of rooms for freshmen alone and coming up with that roughly 25 classroom number.
Right, but if we're at 27 and 25% of parents aren't intending on sending the kids, that brings us to 20. So is there a way to distance 20 kids in that room combined with a mask, combined with a shield? Is that something that we've measured out?
Well, the architects have measured all the rooms. They've walked all the rooms. I think the best way to answer that question would be to say, how closely would the rooms have to be? How close would students have to be in the rooms before you could solve the problem? But the other question is, let's say the guidance and right now, again, it's unknown, can people voluntarily keep their students home? Right now, I think it's ambiguous and leaning towards no. But if the new answer comes back yes, then they would also have the ability and the right to send their students back. 2 weeks into school, things look okay, I'm going to send my child back. So even if we started the year a little bit down, they could come back and we'd have to provide space for them. So we'd be taking a risk if we're already at maximum capacity to not be able to accommodate them as they return. But I think what I would do is I would ask the architects to just tell me what's the number at which everyone fits, and then we would evaluate how safe that feels.
Right. Yeah, because we need to balance their ability to attend with safety, obviously. And if they find, shields plus masks are adequate, that might open up possibilities. If the governor determines no, everybody has to distance regardless of masks and shields, then, he makes a decision for us. But, I think we should be assessing all possibilities, because ideally, if kids can be educated, live daily with whatever spacing possible with the other two prescribed methods, that might be, a very desirable option. I think something we need to really look at.
Okay.
Rob Gershon.
Thank you. I have a question about the sports programs. So I know that they pushed the fall sports back to late September. What in the unfortunate event that fall sports gets postponed to next year, what will happen in terms of the overlapping sports? If you have students who participate in more than one sport over, consecutive seasons, will they have the opportunity to play in both? And if not, how are those decisions going to be made? Will they be made by the students? Do they get to try out for more than one team? Can they, if they're playing in the spring sport, in the fall sport, can they play part of the fall season and then part of the spring season? What is our approach to that?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. I know Mr. Cardillo spends a lot of time working with Section 8, and I know he's been talking with Mr. Cronin, who is our athletic director. So, Charlie, I don't know if you have a little bit more detail on that.
Yeah, okay. So what would happen is if we have the misfortune that the fall sports is canceled, then in early January, the winter sports teams will kick in. So that's a scenario that the state association is putting together. The problem becomes when the fall sport moves to the spring, they will have that'll be in the March, April timeframe, but it's going to overlap with the actual spring sport where there'll be an overlap. So a student wanting to play football would not, and they play lacrosse, would have to make a determination. A student wanting to play baseball who plays soccer would have to make a determination. So that's the structure that's been put in place by the state association. It happens to be the same structure put in place in Virginia. It's in the same structure that's been put in place in several other states. Unfortunately, as they try to consolidate these seasons into, so it would be consolidated seasons for the winter, fall, and spring sports, all into playing in the late winter and then into the spring itself. So yes, unfortunately, we've talked about this. That's the real downside of this. But the other half of it is that the state association is trying to get 3 seasons in. Unfortunately, students are going to have to make a choice. So that is a big downside.
Tom Rotolo.
Dr. Rogers. So obviously, this might go on for a while at the high school. Can we look into exploring additional space or adding additional space?
We can certainly look into it. We have been looking into it. We've been doing some exploring. We've reached out to a couple of places that we thought might have some space that would be for rent. The logistical challenges of having students in 2 places right now, there are a lot of classes that have 9th, 10th, and 11th graders in that class simultaneously. I believe 270 of our 505 freshmen, incoming freshmen, are going to be taking AP classes. Those classes will also have upperclassmen in the class as well. And, you know, our high school schedule is built around the idea that people rotate through the building through all 9 periods. So if we try to separate out a group of students, even separating out, say, freshmen, won't lend itself well to doing that, because their schedules won't allow them to all be in the same place for a full day. They would, you know, whatever class we schedule in the alternate location, they might be 3 or 4 periods there, but then there's another 4 or 5 periods that they would need to be in the other location. So we've started to look at this. I'm daunted by the logistical challenges of it. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep looking at it and keep thinking through it and keep asking ourselves how to do it. But no matter how we do it, it would take, you know, back to my example from Mr. Ulrich, if it was the whole freshman class and they were to be socially distanced, it would be 50 classrooms. We would have to find a facility that was large enough to have 50 classrooms. And since our current high school is 100 classrooms, you're really thinking about a facility that is almost as large as half of our existing high school just to do one class. So it's just, as I said, I'm kind of daunted by the logistics of it, but we have been making those phone calls right now. And if we come up with something that seems workable, or that just presents you with a different set of choices and compromises, you know, and a lot of this is about presenting you with 2 choices that are workable, neither of which is as perfect as what we normally do, and then saying between these 2 choices, we think this is better, not optimal, but better. And then that's how we move forward. So I would want to at least get this to the place where we can look at the choice, and we may look at that choice and say that choice is not worth taking, but it's at least a choice that's in front of us to consider.
Thank you. In light of all those challenges, particularly for the high school, because we're such a large district, obviously we find ourselves in this situation where there's no choice but alternating days for the high school. Is there any indication from the Board of Regents, the College Board, to adjust the curriculum somehow so that students in larger districts find themselves at no academic disadvantage in comparison to much smaller districts where they'll be able to go to school every day?
It's a good question. It came up in the conference call with the superintendents and the commissioner of education today. The question was asked about the 3 through 8 testing, which was waived this past spring. And that's actually a federal mandate. And so the commissioner said that it's her opinion that if the federal government makes it possible to apply for a waiver again this spring, that they would likely pursue that. The second part of that, the other assessment program the state runs, is the Regents assessment program. And she was asked about whether the Board of Regents has made any decisions, not just about the full year program, but even about the January administration of the Regents exams, which would be the next upcoming administration. And she said that that question is in front of her board, which is, her board is the Board of Regents. So they have not made that decision at this point. I didn't get the sense that that decision was imminent. Obviously, from a planning perspective, the sooner we know what the content for the course is, the better the teachers can plan the arc of that instruction over the course of the year. So I think at this point, we will prepare as though it is the full curriculum and the expectations of a Regents exam at the end of the course. But it's clearly on everyone's minds, and the commissioner had already done some thinking about it because she had an answer at the ready.
Andy?
Wanted to just ask about the possibility of a positive test for a student. Is there any provision for following the contact tracing guidelines that the state has instituted?
Yep, sorry, just writing my notes. So the county health department is responsible for the contact tracing. We are responsible for cooperating with them. We have had several of our nurses and at least one of our administrators take the state's contact tracing course. It's an online course because we thought that we would be able to better support the health department if we had people on staff who understood what the algorithms were for contact tracing. So that was not a requirement. That was something we did on our own initiative. In my conversation with the health commissioner, and let me take one step back from COVID. Let's just talk about any reportable communicable disease. So let's whooping cough, which is pertussis. So if there's a case of whooping cough and it is a medical provider has a positive test for somebody who comes to their clinic, they are required to inform the health department. And then the health department is required to inform the school district, and the health department directs us as to what we need to do next. And they decide if there has been any exposure, they decide what the algorithm is, if there's cleaning necessary, or if we need to contact people, and sometimes we'll notify the families in the classroom, sometimes we notify families in the whole building. They dictate all of that to us, and then we follow through on what they tell us to do. So that's with any reportable disease. Obviously, COVID is a reportable disease. So the contact tracing is conducted by them. We may support them. So they may ask us to identify who are the children that are in the same classroom with this child, or who are the children who have the same lunch period as this child, or who are the children that ride the same bus as this child. There will be on the same sports team as this child. There will be all of those places where there's the potential for contact, and then they will identify what constitutes a contact. And being on a bus with a child, but sitting on opposite ends of that bus, they will not consider to be a contact. But they actually have to get to a place where they are evaluating things at that level of granularity to make decisions about what does and doesn't constitute a primary contact. So I can't give you a nice cookbook for what that looks like, because it really is case by case. And obviously, we notified the community back in March when we were alerted to by the health department to positive cases in our community. And we worked with the health department on every single one of those cases. And so I have a pretty good sense of what that looks like. They, again, have reserved that contact tracing to themselves because of confidentiality reasons. That's something that only the health department can do. We play a support role, but we don't play a lead role.
Dr. Lamelza had mentioned during his portion of the presentation that the mental health staff, there's a plan for them to be reaching out. And I was wondering if you could be a little bit more specific as to whether that means reaching out to students, reaching out to parents. Is that in a virtual setting only? Are there modifications to their reaching out in an in-person setting? If you could just elaborate a little bit, thanks.
Sure, Dr. Lamelza, can you give us a little bit more detail, please?
Sure. With us being in session, certainly then there would be reaching out to students who have been identified or who are displaying concerns, again, utilizing our referral process. Certainly there will be follow-up with families. If we are in any other sort of model, with the hybrid model or the virtual model, we have been, I think, effective in monitoring student needs. During this past spring, we had put together a whole database. We were reviewing attendance issues. We were reviewing, again, concerns that were brought forward by teachers or by parents. So it's been a multi-pronged approach, I would say. And certainly those students that are already on our radar, those students that, have had services related to social emotional issues, SEL issues, psychiatric issues are certainly going to be followed up very closely. But I think what we've done now is intentionally shift to be a little more proactive in just identifying, reaching out. We're utilizing all the communication avenues that we have, our website, and the other kind of communications that are going out to just raise people's awareness and to let families know there are supports offered through the district, but also more importantly, there are supports offered in the community as well. So really, I see us as a kind of a conduit to get families and students the support that they need. And I include our staff members in that as well, because they're struggling as well. And I think we'd be foolish to dismiss that.
Yep. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Chris DiFilippo.
Thank you, Tracy. On the topic of homeschooling, a couple of things. I looked at several other school districts today, and some of them have a lot of information on the website, right? Plain sight. So I didn't really see that. I heard it mentioned, but I didn't really see it in the survey, and I could have overlooked that. But I think we need to put that on the website with all the information we have on it, because parents may just want to be educated on what it's about and take a look at it and see if it might fit for them or their situation, whether it's short-term or long-term. So perhaps we could take a look at that. Some of the school districts that, one locally that has it is Plainview, Old Bethpage. They also, it's directed to the pupil personnel services. They put the person's name there and the email address and other information. It was right there on the main page. The New York State Department of Education has a guidance document, part 100.10. It's been out a while. It details the regulations and establishes the procedures for parents who may want to consider homeschooling.
Yeah, we're familiar with that. Dr. Lamelza is our homeschooling coordinator. I can certainly talk with the folks who maintain the website to see if we can make that more prominent and easier for parents to find, understanding and reading a little bit in the media that this is something that has gotten a lot of parent attention as they're thinking about the fall. So I think we can certainly anticipate that there will be some interest. And Dr. Lamelza, I don't know off the top of my head if there's any deadline to apply for homeschooling.
No, there really is not. I mean, we have had an increase. I wouldn't say a significant increase. We've had maybe 5, 6 at this point who have inquired. Certainly that document that you refer to, Mr. DiFilippo, is part of the package that goes out to parents that express an interest. The state has a whole process and procedures requiring independent, an IHIP, a home educational plan, and that has to be submitted to us. We review that. It includes, what subjects they're going to be handling, how they're going to be delivering them, how they're going to be assessing progress. So it's a formalized process. And as I said, we've had an increase. Typically, we don't have a lot of parents who have requested it, given the nature of our district, but there have always been a few. And there has been a bit of an uptick, but I wouldn't say it's significant. But I think certainly we can look into putting more information on the website.
Yeah, I think the other item I brought up was that, again, some parents may just want to try it short term, see if it works or not. And if it doesn't, there should be some type of transition plan. We could, the district can talk to them on how to get back into, the mainstream of the school district, if that's what they decide, because let's say, there's a vaccine early next year or something, and they feel a lot more comfortable, but not exposing their children in a large environment with other people.
But it is a fluid system. There's no, as I said, deadline. There's no, if you choose it for this year, you must stay for the year. So it is flexible. You know, the concern would be, where is the child in relationship to the curriculum and their ability? But essentially, they would be treated like a transfer student coming in. Homeschooling is really looked at as parental placement, as you would place your child in a private school or a parochial school. You're choosing to place your child at home, and you're taking the responsibility of educating them as the parent.
Tom Rotolo?
So one of my concerns also was taking the temperature when people are coming into the school, and also the rapid response testing, because I understand that the health department will do their thing, but it could be the whole day that person can spread the virus throughout the school. So I would feel, I would like to know what procedures we can put in place ahead of time to kind of mitigate the spread throughout the school.
Yeah.
And I know it's early on in the process. So
yeah, that's exactly the sort of guidance that we're looking for from the Nassau County Department of Health. So we are not able to do testing. And that was something that was made clear to us early on in this process. School districts are not testing sites. So you'd have to have a school health clinic in order to do that. And that's a fairly complicated process. So there's no anticipation that we'll be doing actual testing. What we will do is, if we identify a student that has symptoms that are consistent with COVID, we will segregate them immediately, and then we'll ask the parents to come and pick them up. And obviously the next question comes, what happens if the parent doesn't come immediately? The student would remain in isolation. And if for some reason we felt that the student's symptoms were worsening, obviously we would take them to a more urgent care location, possibly a hospital emergency room or something like that. We would arrange transport to a more supportive care environment. That's the worst case scenario. But the scenario that is anticipated is that students are isolated. They're treated as presumptive positive, and that's why they have to leave the school environment. We have the authority under Section 906 of the Education Law to exclude the student immediately. And so that's what that exclusion process looks like. But the testing is not something that the school district can perform.
So can we take the temperature of the students coming in and the teachers? How is that going to work on entrance into the school?
We can, and we are planning to. We're planning to have both systems in place. The questionnaire that people would fill out prior to coming to school. And it's our expectation that as part of filling out that questionnaire, a staff member would take their temperature daily. A parent would take their child's temperature daily before coming to school. And the state guidance says that temperature taking at home is ideal. And that's obvious. You'd want the child to be with their parent when a fever is discovered. But we would supplement that with temperature taking at the school, which is what we do now in the summer school program. And the temperature taking is for all staff. The instructional staff, the custodial staff in the building, everyone is having their temperature taken every day. And it's easy, it's painless, it's no touch, it's no risk. And it just gives everybody a little bit of assurance that we're just staying on top of any possible symptoms. So we would do that as well. And then several weeks in, the state says their preference is not to do it at the building. Their preference is to do it before people arrive at the building. But I think we would want to do both and then take stock of where we are after we get a couple of weeks in and see how it's going.
Rep. Gershon?
Is there any guidance from the state regarding driver's education and when we are allowed to start that up again? How is the school going to prioritize who gets it? Will it go by date of birth or some other system?
Okay, you're a full jump ahead of me. I'll tell you what I do know, which is that the state has not issued any guidance memos on driver's ed, and I looked recently. So I don't have an answer to the question, when is that going to be permissible? Obviously, the problem there is having multiple people in a car at the same time from different families. So it had not occurred to me to wonder about how we would prioritize or triage availability of driver's ed. So I will put that on the plate of the instructional team to start to think through. And we'll come back to you with an answer by the meeting next week.
Chris Ulrich?
Yeah, Dr. Arts, just to clarify, the touchless temperature taking, is that for all students entering the building or just those with the indicator on the app? Because in the example you gave, Mr. Rotolo, you were referring to the teachers coming in. I just want to clarify, regardless of what the app says, is every student having their temperature taken?
Yes, that's the plan for the first several weeks. And so we would take everyone's temperatures, and we would also hope that we got 100% compliance with the app. And if several weeks in, we found that the compliance with the app was really good, we might take stock of where we are, see if the guidance has changed a little bit. But until we get to that place where we've never done anything quite like this before. So until we get to that place where we can really evaluate a little bit of data and experience, the safest thing to do is to take every temperature at the school building at the start of the day. And then obviously we'll be thoughtful about how, if there is a positive read and somebody's over 100, we'll find gentle ways of saying, that was weird. Come over here. Let's try that again. Try not to stigmatize anybody who needs to be pulled out.
Then just following up on the slide you had done in the beginning with the parental survey, where we said 27.2% of parents would prefer to not send their children in the fall. Then we had 4 follow-up questions. Are you going to use busing? Are you going to drive? Are you going to use school lunch? Were those questions asked of the remaining 72%, or was that asked of the entire 100%?
It was asked of the entire 100%. And so you would imagine that there's a lot of overlap between the not taking bus group and the not coming to school group, because you would answer both of those questions as a no. So in terms of our analysis of the data, we're not quite that deep yet. We've been doing some building by building analysis of bus use and planning on sending their child to school, because obviously knowing that at a building level is important. But also at this point, we're going to have to, once we resolve this question from the state of what is and what isn't allowed, we're going to have to start initiating conversations with families about whether their intention is to bring their children back in the fall, so that we can get to the point of actually planning out class sections and literally getting to that level of detail.
Gotcha. So these numbers are of the whole, but we may have to reanalyze them of the portion sending if that's the route it goes, which could impact planning the buses, planning the lunches, etc.
Right. Well, I don't think that, we couldn't go a little bit deeper into analyzing this survey data, but what will be more useful, for example, is to know how many of them are second graders at Bayless, because we need to plan that class. And for busing, we need to literally know where the residences are, because the routes are planned by the number of people that are along the route. And when the route breaks, to have to be split into 2 routes because we've exceeded capacity. So to do all of that, we really have to start identifying individual children by name and address, so that we know who they are, what grade they're in, what building they go to, what bus they ride. So the survey was to give us sort of a rough sense of what the proportions are, but to do the actual planning and detail work, we're going to have we're going to have to identify the individual students themselves.
Okay, thank you.
Carol?
Okay, apologize for that. Okay, the presentation that Dr. Rufo mentioned about the school bus that Huntington Coach will be doing routine cleaning of the buses. Since according to the survey results, we have 52.9% of people willing to take the bus. So is that going to be, are the buses going to be cleaned after each run or at the end of the day?
So we're working through that with Huntington Coach right now. It takes time to clean a bus, and we're trying to identify, it takes time and it takes staff. So both of those things are challenging. What we haven't identified yet, and this goes to Mr. Ulrich's question, is how many runs it's going to take the buses to clear the neighborhoods. So right now we do one run for elementary, one run for middle school, one run for high school, not in that order, obviously. With only 22 students on a bus, we may have to do a run to a neighborhood twice in order to get all the students. And that obviously puts more pressure on the amount of time that the bus needs to be in motion picking up kids rather than stationary so that it can be serviced in some way. What we're certain is going to happen is that we're going to go from the once a day disinfecting that we had back in the spring to twice a day disinfecting in the spring, in the midday hour. What we're looking at is how much work time are those buses going to be having in the mornings? Is there enough time between those runs to do some sort of disinfecting in the buses? And I don't have a good answer to that question yet because we haven't figured out all of the routes yet.
Anna?
Susan was there first, but okay. Sorry. Speaking of the numbers, do we have any data provided by the Department of Health on COVID infections at daycare facilities that were open, day camps, and summer programs? Anything at all? And broken down by age of the children?
I'm not familiar with that as a data set, but it's not a data set that I've gone looking for. I think what I'll do is tomorrow we'll ask our lead nurse to see if she's familiar with that, and I'll get some data and have it ready for you certainly by your meeting next week.
But we didn't have any in Syosset among the essential workers' children that we had to provide services for?
That's correct, and my desk is made of wood, and I just knocked on it.
Susan Falco?
So I know a lot of the high school parents are going to be concerned about what kind of, that their children are going to receive an equivalent education to being in full school as opposed to the hybrid. Could you elaborate on what kind of instruction will be provided to the students on their out of school day, and also what kind of resources will be given to them to help them on the days that they're not in school, to help them with whatever they have to do on their off school days? And just as a follow-up to my first question that I had, the high schoolers, if they are forced to quarantine for the 14 days, a lot of those courses are so specific that there's not so many people available. If you're in one of the AP sciences or special classes, like there's a lot of classes that don't have so many kids, that would there be a teacher available to help them with the work to keep them up to date for those 2 weeks in an online setting?
Yeah, so I'll answer the latter question first. My colleagues, my fellow superintendents and I all recognize that this is a challenge. We also recognize that we may have different skill sets among staff who are working from a virtual environment, and there may be some way to collaborate to try and solve some of those problems. If you have a student who's out and needs some very specialized kind of instruction, obviously that presents a number of real logistical challenges, but it's something that we're trying to think through how to do and how to do well. On the former, we're working now with the high school staff on how to structure that alternate day education. We've kind of figured out the model for the schedule of it. The next thing is to figure out what the model looks like instructionally. It may be different for different types of classes. College level classes may lend themselves, AP classes, the SUPA classes, upper grade honors classes, they may lend themselves to one type of instruction. Other classes may work differently. We have a number of teachers who are already part of our flipped classroom pilot program, where they will record a lecture in advance of instruction so that they can maximize their time in the classroom working with individual students. So that would obviously lend itself well to that. And we're exploring other options there as well. So there's a lot of work left to be done there. We're sort of reporting to you on an interim basis where we're at now in terms of identifying what the overall structure would be. Now we have to go course by course and figure out how best to deliver the content in that course. It may look different for an art class than it does for a math class.
Andy, did you have a question?
No, I'm okay.
Okay, so I'm glad that the board is going to have another opportunity on the 29th, because as you're taking the feedback that you've gotten so far from us and the additional parent feedback, I know you're going to be presenting us with further details on the 29th. And so
The guy drove in one day. He turned around and drove back the same day.
anyway, so I know that the board will continue to have questions and want to give feedback, and we'll expect to have that opportunity on the 29th. Tom?
Dr. Rogers, I know this is really overwhelming, but I know you got parents' feedback, but did we get teachers and student feedback also?
We did, and that was mentioned earlier in the slideshow. I met with a group of students. I know that at the building level, there are a lot of meetings with students talking about the instruction from the spring. We've been in constant communication with our Teachers Association. As we said in the task force, a tremendous number of teachers have participated in the task force. We have a tremendous number of teachers participating in curriculum writing this summer. And yes, we're getting a lot of feedback from a lot of sources. One of the things the state guidance requires us to do is to work in partnership with our Teachers Association. We certainly have been doing that, and we have been in frequent communication.
Okay.
Just one quick,
Yeah.
has there been a survey to the students at large versus interviewing a number of students? I don't know how many or which grades, but just like we sent the survey to the parents, do we have a survey for the students to get their feedback since they were the ones in the classes?
We did not survey the students, but the thought exchange that we did the last time included students as part of that thought exchange. And my thought, pardon the pun, was to do the same thing again this time. So we would have reactions from students in there that we would be able to look at as well.
All right, Dr. Rogers and everyone who has helped us tonight, we really appreciate your responses, the clarifications, and we look forward to having another opportunity next week to do the same. So we wish everyone a good night. I understand that we've got tons of viewers tonight, so thank you for participating in our meeting, and have a great night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Everyone, good night.
Good night.